Enemies are inevitable. If you're building something real, they will come. Some will attack you outright. Others will disguise it with praise. Some will try to ruin you. Others will pretend they're protecting you while tightening the leash. And most people, they spend their lives avoiding enemies, appeasing them, explaining themselves, trying to be unproblematic. But Machiavelli, he didn't run from enemies. He needed them. To Machiavelli, an enemy was not a threat. It was an asset waiting to be activated, an opportunity, a pawn, a weapon in the making. He understood something most people never realize. The enemy is more valuable than the ally because they move faster, think deeper, and reveal themselves quicker. In a world full of masks, enemies are honest, and if you know how to use them, they become more useful than any friend ever could. This is the doctrine Machiavelli would teach today. Not how to avoid enemies, but how to use them strategically, mercilessly, permanently. Here are the 13 rules he'd use to turn enemies into fuel. The first rule: you don't reveal that you see them. You never acknowledge the attack directly. You let them believe you're unaware while you're already maneuvering behind the curtain. Because when enemies think you're oblivious, they show their real hand. They talk more. They overreach. They relax their discipline. And that's when you strike, not with confrontation, but with design. The second rule: mirror their behavior, not their energy. If they're loud, you stay calm. If they provoke, you pause. If they escalate, you go still. Because nothing disorients an enemy more than an opponent who refuses to follow their tempo. Machiavelli would say, whoever masters the rhythm controls the battle. So you don't match emotion, you match pattern. You study it, you reflect it, then break it on your terms. Third rule: let them underestimate your reach. When they try to isolate you, make them think they've succeeded. Let them assume you have no allies, no leverage, no influence. And then reveal that you were never alone, that the person they confided in was yours, that the system they thought they'd hijacked still belongs to you. Enemies collapse fastest when they think they've won too early. Never stop them from celebrating. Let them party, then take the floor out from under them while they're still raising the glass. The fourth rule: reward their ego, not their attacks. An insecure enemy attacks for recognition. Don't deny it. Feed it. You compliment their ambition. You nod at their aggression. You make them feel seen. And in doing so, you put a leash around their neck made of flattery. Now they're predictable. Now they crave your attention. Now they won't move without imagining your reaction. You've replaced their autonomy with your shadow. That's not manipulation. That's psychological architecture. Fifth rule: leak false information intentionally. When they're watching you, give them something to find, not the truth, just a version of it. You mention a plan that isn't real. You reference a conversation that never happened. You pretend to be angry at someone you trust. They take the bait. They act on it. They expose themselves by reacting to a lie. And when they move based on false intelligence, they do your work for you. Machiavelli never fought wars with swords. He fought them with shadows. Sixth rule: elevate one enemy above the others. You don't fight the crowd. You find the loudest among them, the most emotional, the most reckless. And you make them a star. You address them subtly. Respond to them indirectly. Give them just enough oxygen to inflate, and they will overstep. They'll alienate their allies. They'll reveal too much. By the time they realize what happened, they're standing alone on a battlefield of their own making, while you've already moved on. Seventh rule: convert the weakest enemy into an informant. Every group of enemies has a weak link. Someone insecure, someone desperate, someone who feels overlooked. Find them, compliment them, confide in them falsely. Give them the illusion of special access. Then sit back and watch them bring you everything you need. Why fight the group when one of them is already working for you? Loyalty doesn't come from trust. It comes from being needed, and enemies want to feel needed more than anyone. The 8th rule: let your enemies speak first, in meetings, in arguments, in the public square. You let them speak, you let them posture, you let them think they've won the narrative. And then, when the silence falls, you say one sentence, not to defend yourself, but to reframe the battlefield. One line that refracts their aggression into insecurity. One line that makes the audience question everything they just heard. Never speak first. Never argue longer. You strike once with precision. Machiavelli said, "He who wishes to be obeyed must know how to command with silence." The 9th rule: never punish publicly unless it's symbolic. Most enemies ruin themselves. They overstep. They break. They lose control. Let them do it privately. But if you do need to move publicly, make it surgical. One statement, one action, one dismissal. No rage, no revenge, just clarity. You don't destroy them. You erase their relevance. The crowd doesn't remember what they did. They remember how quickly it ended. That's the coldest kind of power, not the roar, but the silence that follows. There's a difference between destroying your enemies and absorbing them. Anyone can fight. But Machiavelli didn't want war. He wanted obedience. He wanted enemies so destabilized, so emotionally misaligned, that by the time they realized they were fighting the wrong battle, they were already working for him. That's what the 10th rule accomplishes. Offer redemption, but at a cost. You don't chase your enemy. You don't extend olive branches for peace. You make them come to you, and when they do, after all the damage, all the posturing, all the attacks, you don't greet them with rage. You greet them with mercy, but not for free. You give them a role, a way back in, but you place them under your terms, your timeline, your conditions. Now, the one who once tried to destroy you has chained themselves to your rules voluntarily, and they'll follow more strictly than any loyalist because they know one misstep and the rope snaps. That's not peace. That's domination through benevolence. You didn't just win, you converted. Then you move to the 11th rule. Turn their hatred into your proof of strength. Enemies speak, they lie, they distort, they smear. But Machiavelli would never argue with the narrative. He would let it run, because every time they spoke his name in anger, they were reinforcing his presence. Every time they tried to damage him, they revealed how deeply he lived in their mind. That's the principle. Let their obsession expose your power. You don't fight it. You let it grow, because the more they fight, the more people wonder why they care so much. And when the attention shifts, they see it. Your enemy is obsessed. You are unaffected. One looks unstable, the other unshakable. Now, even people who don't like you start respecting you because you endured. You didn't flinch. You didn't fall. You absorbed the storm without a single crack. That's not defense. That's myth-making. And then comes the 12th rule. Disappear, then re-emerge stronger. When the conflict dies down, don't linger. You vanish. Let them sit in the aftermath. Let them try to guess what you're doing. Let them build theories, invent motives, replay every move. Because absence breeds tension, and tension gives power weight. When you reappear, you don't address the past. You return colder, calmer, and farther ahead than when you left. You don't explain the gap. You let the results speak. Now your silence has a legacy. Now your return isn't casual. It's a statement. They know you don't react. You strategize. They know you don't explain. You move. And this rewrites your image completely. You're no longer someone with enemies. You're the one whose presence recalibrates the room. And now, the 13th and final rule. Turn your enemy into your reputation. Every attack they launch becomes evidence of your threat level. Every alliance they form against you becomes confirmation of your influence. And every time they try to frame you as dangerous, you lean in. You never say, "I'm misunderstood." You say, "Maybe you should be afraid." Because fear, when well managed, is more reliable than love. You take everything they tried to use against you, your intensity, your silence, your unpredictability, and you polish it. You make it your symbol. Now the world doesn't just know you survived them. They know you absorbed them. Their effort made you stronger. Their resistance built your image. Their obsession constructed your myth. You didn't break them with force. You bent them with presence. You don't need allies. You need shadows. And enemies create the best ones. They never sleep. They never stop watching. And they do your marketing for free. Machiavelli didn't just outlast his enemies. He turned them into echo chambers, screening his name long after he left the room. That's how you build an empire in silence, not with applause, not with pity, but with enemies who screen your power louder than your friends ever could. Because the final, brutal truth is this: people will only take you seriously once they've seen what happens to those who didn't. Once the enemies are silent, you don't celebrate, you don't flex, you don't even acknowledge the victory. You let silence spread like smoke. Because the real Machiavellian move isn't to defeat your enemies, it's to rearrange the world in the space they used to occupy. That's how true power is born. Not through revenge, but through recalibration. They're no longer fighting you. They're reacting to a version of you they don't understand. You're unpredictable now. You're elevated. You're out of reach. And the people around you feel it, even if they don't speak it. The tone changes when you enter. Conversations soften when you observe. People preface their opinions with caution. You haven't said a word, but you've become a presence they edit themselves around. That's not reputation. That's psychological hierarchy. And it started with enemies, but didn't end there. Because once people watch you survive betrayal, once they see you outmaneuver attacks without explaining yourself, they know what you are. Not someone who plays the game, someone who designs it. That's where the transformation begins. You're not a man anymore. You're not a woman. You're not a leader. You're an environment, a climate others adapt to, a pressure system that quietly governs behavior. And this is the reward for not retaliating emotionally, for letting your enemies burn themselves trying to expose you, for becoming unshakable when most people would have flinched. You've become someone who doesn't need validation because you've weaponized your restraint. This is the stage Machiavelli operated in, not influence, but invisible enforcement. He didn't need to remind people what he was capable of. He simply became the reminder, because that's the most potent kind of power. When your name isn't just a name, it's a consequence. Not because you're cruel, but because you've become the ending people fear reaching. That's the psychology of post-conflict control. You didn't destroy your enemies. You evolved past them, so far, so fast, that chasing you now feels humiliating. Let them try. Let them pretend they still matter. Because the truth is, by the time they're thinking of you, you're already shaping what they think. And the ones who used to oppose you, they either minute you or stay out of your way. That's how you start building something greater than fear, greater than influence, greater than victory. You start building authority. And it isn't loud, it isn't popular, it isn't shared, it's yours. You don't need to remind them what you did. They carry that memory for you. You don't need to prove what you are. They reshape themselves so you never have to prove it again. This is where you stop being reactive and start becoming mythical. Because here's the thing about surviving enemies. People remember the battle, but they remember the survivor even more. And they start asking themselves questions. Why didn't they break? Why didn't they defend themselves? What do they know that I don't? That last question, that's the one that makes them follow you without ever hearing a command. Because once people believe you see something they don't, they stop challenging you. They start orbiting. That's what Machiavelli mastered. He didn't want compliance. He wanted inevitability. So when people thought of him, they didn't see a man. They saw a force, a law, a threat wrapped in elegance. And when that's how people see you, you don't need to fight your enemies. They fight themselves, just trying to avoid your shadow. When your enemies fall silent, the people watching take note. They remember how loud those voices used to be, how confident, how certain. And now they are gone. No warning, no public takedown, just silence and space where resistance used to be. You didn't just wing, you created a pattern, and the human mind learns through pattern. One voice challenges you. It disappears. Another mocks you. It folds. A third spreads doubt. And soon they're gone too, faded, discredited, irrelevant. You never raise your voice. You never explain your side. You just move. And everyone else begins to self-regulate. They soften their tone when they talk about you. They avoid your name in certain circles. They preface disagreement with respect, because no one knows for sure what happened. But everyone knows something did. This is Machiavellian power scaling, where enemies no longer drain you. They expand your influence, because fear spreads faster than reason. And once fear becomes associated with your name, you no longer need to control people directly. They do it to themselves. You've entered what most leaders dream of and never reach: automated dominance. Your past enemies become reference points, cautionary tales, case studies whispered in private rooms. People say things like, "Don't come for him unless you're ready." You know what happened to the last person who tried that. Just keep your distance, it's not worth it. And none of that came from you. It came from what you allowed them to see. That's the play. You don't respond to accusations. You create uncertainty. You don't shut down enemies. You let them spiral just far enough for the room to watch the fall. Now the group becomes your enforcer, not out of loyalty, out of pattern recognition. People see the results and they act accordingly. No one wants to be the next example. No one wants to be on the wrong side of whatever it is you do. No one wants to guess what you'll do next. And so they play safe. They flatter. They avoid. You've made it easier for people to comply than to resist. Not through charisma, through consequence. And when you reach that point, you don't need a large presence. You just need stories. The story of how you responded when someone disrespected you. The story of how a critic vanished. The story of the silence that followed the last mistake. It doesn't even matter if it's exaggerated, if it's inaccurate, if it never happened the way they say it did. What matters is that they're telling it. The myth does more work than the truth ever could. That's the power of legacy-based fear. Not the kind that screams in their face, but the kind that waits in their mind. The kind that makes people slow down when they say your name. The kind that changes how they move before you even enter the room. And here's the real brilliance. You didn't build this with allies. You built it with enemies. The ones who tried to break you, they handed you their attention. They gave you the platform. They gave you the theater for everyone else to watch. You didn't need a stage. They built it for you out of malice. And when they fell, your shadow grew larger. Because there's something about watching someone survive hostility without reacting that makes everyone watching silently ask themselves, what would happen if they turned that silence toward me? That thought, that hesitation, is power. Not performative, not short-lived, but deep, residual, subconscious. The kind of power that no speech, no branding, no charm can ever replicate. And once you install it, you don't use it. You let them live with it. Let them project it. Let them wonder if it's still there. Because the longer they don't see you act, the more dangerous they believe you've become. When power matures, it doesn't shout. It whispers. And eventually it disappears. But even in that absence, it governs. This is the phase Machiavelli mastered. Not domination through presence, but obedience through memory. Once you've used your enemies, once you've absorbed their attacks, exposed their motives, redirected their energy into myth, you vanish. Not out of fear, but out of design. Because visibility is vulnerability, and those who need to constantly assert power are already losing it. True control doesn't require announcements. It requires architecture, systems of silence that keep working, even after you stop. The people who once fought you, they don't just stop attacking. They begin to emulate you. They quote your tactics. They mirror your tone. They apply your rules without ever admitting where they learned them. Your language becomes their strategy. Your restraint becomes their posture. Your coldness becomes their protection. And they never give you credit, because they can't. To acknowledge you is to acknowledge that you won, so they borrow you in secret. That's legacy, not followers, but reflections. You don't appear in their feeds, you appear in their systems. You've moved from enemy to standard, from name to algorithm. They adjust their plans based on your history. They temper their tone based on your silence. They second-guess their strategy because they remember your patterns. You didn't threaten them. You didn't destroy them. You just stood still while they unraveled. And now they carry your doctrine like a virus, one they fear but can't shake. This is Machiavellian ghost power. Power that isn't tracked. Power that isn't named. Power that hides inside behavior. The people closest to you, they stop asking what you think. They start predicting it. They start pre-correcting their actions before you've even seen them. Why? Because the punishment already exists in their mind. You don't need to act. You already have. In their anxiety, in their planning, in their restraint. You're there, invisible, but governing. That's the point. Enemies become warnings. Silence becomes command. Your name becomes a limit people don't cross, even when you're not watching. They think twice before disagreeing, not because they fear confrontation, but because they know if you ever did respond, it wouldn't be emotional, it would be final. That's the most dangerous energy of all. Not the one who punishes, but the one who could, and simply doesn't. Because if you've proven you can survive without reacting, you've proven you don't need the battlefield at all. You've become a force that doesn't compete, a mind that doesn't chase, a shadow that doesn't fade even when the light is gone. This is the lesson most never reach: to rule without proximity, to control without movement, to haunt without hostility. Enemies gave you this, and now they fear what they built. You were never chasing power. You were building gravity, a pull so quiet, so precise, it reshapes people without touch. And now, you don't even need enemies. They served their purpose. They gave you resistance. They gave you visibility. They gave you mythology. You don't hate them. You thank them. Because without them, there'd be no legend to fear, no silhouette to whisper about, no map built around the place not to step. That's the final evolution of Machiavellian power. Power that doesn't react to challenges. It creates them just to teach a lesson. Enemies are no longer threats. They're raw material. You mold them, break them, convert them. You don't remove opposition. You let it speak, let it expose itself, and then you erase it, not with noise, but with silence so total they question if you were ever real.